Well, welcome back to another week's analysis behind the news. Just going to glance at a few headlines and fill you in on some of these things to think about what we're talking about. Here, for instance, in the New York Times yesterday was this article, "Why Poverty in America, Why Can't We End It?" Well, it's quite simple. It's because we keep financing it. If we would stop paying for poverty, it would dry up because people would have to go out and look for work. It's a very simple concept, but the people in government haven't got it figured out yet. Actually, they do have it figured out. They don't want poverty to disappear because it helps build the bureaucracy, helps provide jobs for them. It helps them build their departments so that they have to hire more employees, so that the more employees they have, they get elevated higher in their status in government and get paid more for managing more people. So they have no vested interest in getting rid of poverty. So it doesn't take a whole article to figure this out. But like most New York Times articles, they tend to be a little verbose. It's the same way with the war on terror. We see here, for instance, now that Al-Qaeda is in Mali. Originally, Al-Qaeda was only in Afghanistan, and then it was here and there and everywhere else, and Yemen and Mali and so on. We have a propensity when we have a war on poverty or a war on terror or a war on this or that or the other thing, that it, like drugs, the problem grows. Government doesn't solve it. They just help make it bigger. Now, I know that there are those of you out there that work, for security firms, for the military, to combat drugs and all the rest of it. And down at the grunt level, if you don't mind me using that particular term, you are doing your job. But it's the overall policy of the federal government that's making it worse. Sometimes overseas in their policies in relationship to foreign policy, that makes these things worse, like the drug war, the war on terror, and that kind of thing. But just think back, every time we have formed an agency or a bureau or a department to solve a problem, the problem always gets worse. Another example is the Department of Energy, which was supposedly put together so that we would be completely self-sufficient in the way of oil, etc. Are we? No. The only reason we are becoming self-sufficient, not self-sufficient, but less dependent on foreign oil, is because of the massive hue and cry that has been raised by the American people, as well as the discoveries of tremendous amounts of energy in the states of North and South Dakota and Montana and all the way through, clear over to New York. And it's hard to hide those sorts of things. They tried for years, by the way. I recall that when Nelson Rockefeller was up to confirm his nomination for Vice President of the United States, keep in mind Spiro Agnew had to resign, and then Ford was made Vice President. Then Nixon had to resign, and then Ford needed a vice president, and so rather than electing one, they appointed one, and it turned out to be Nelson Rockefeller, which most of us thought would ultimately become the vice president anyway. There were a lot of things going on in the Rockefeller family at that time that indicated they wanted that kind of power. Well, at any rate, in his confirmation hearings before the Senate of the United States, he made the statement that there was enough oil in the continental United States to supply the world for 100 years, maybe more. That was something that never came out. If you read his confirmation hearings, you would have read it, but most reporters, they didn't mention this or a lot of other facts, by the way, in that confirmation. Another, the Wall Street Journal on Friday, for instance, said a pledge to save the euro. Well, the head of the Central Bank of Europe says, within our mandate, the ECB, in other words, the European Central Bank, is willing to do whatever it takes to preserve the euro, and believe me, it will be enough. Well, you don't want to read this article as if it's save the euro, it's save the European Union. They will do anything they need to save the European Union, because it's so important on the general scheme of things toward a new world order by regionalizing parts of the world as a step towards ultimately bringing it all under a mandatory world parliament. Now, in this particular case, of course, we will help bail them out, China will help bail them out, etc. But even if they don't, keep this thing in mind, and that's this, that even if the euro collapses or any currency collapses, it is an opportunity for those in power to bring about a totalitarian state. They will always use these things in that regard. I hear a lot of conservatives say, well, let's just let it go, let it all collapse, so we can get back to a good system and start all over. Government will never allow us to do that unless we also get the government to become smaller. They will use an economic collapse to bring about more controls. Look what they did during the Depression. They built more government, ostensibly to help the poor, and they're still doing it. The war on poverty is a natural extension of that process, and it was finalized under President Johnson. But it's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, where today they estimate, or I guess it's an actual fact, 47 million people are on food stamps. Now, I don't know if that's counting the people that get the food stamps, or whatever they call it these days, or if that's the people it feeds. In other words, does a single mother with 2 children, is that counted as one who gets the food stamps, or the 3? I don't know the answer to that question. I should. I'm going to have to look into it. But 47 million keeps growing and growing every year. Finally, I just want to talk about the article that appeared in the New York Times yesterday. Is algebra necessary? It's interesting. This is an article, by the way, that is trying to get you to think that we should no longer teach algebra to children in schools. And, you know, it's one of those things that's part of the dumbing down process over the years. Just keep taking more and more subjects out of the curriculum, those subjects that have value, those subjects that make you think, like algebra makes you think. And get rid of those things, and we just have a bunch of automatons who've learned by rote. In other words, if you know all these facts that we've shown you, that we put in front of you, you get to move on to the next grade. In some schools, even if you don't know all these facts, you're moved on to the next grade. But they don't get kids thinking in the way they used to have them think. Algebra, it makes you think. Sure, you can learn your multiplication tables and everything else by rote. That's fine. But at some point along the road, you're going to have to apply these figures that you've memorized so that you can think. Algebra does that. It's the beginning process of all high-level mathematics. It is not necessarily mandatory in every high school, etc. And some people struggle with it. It's because they have trouble thinking at that particular level. But it's one of those things that we can't produce high-level scientists in this country unless it's a stepping process, starting with algebra. And if you take that out of the curriculum, there's no trigonometry, there's no geometry, there's no calculus. So if you don't start with algebra, what are you going to turn out in the end? And these are the individuals you need for scientific advancement, the inventors, those individuals that have to work with mathematics in order to bring about something new in the way of inventing a better camera, a better car, a better it doesn't matter. You have to have these skills. And so if we take that skill, that primary mathematical skill out of the schools, what do you have? You will not have scientific advancement and major industry within your country. Until next week, we'll see you then.